In a world where everyone is trying to sell you something, be it an idea, an emotion, or even your own mind, there is one thing that can set you free. Manipulation is as old as humanity itself. It shows up in your relationships, your career, even in the way you view yourself. But what if there were laws, time-tested philosophical principles that could shield you from these forces? Stoicism, an ancient philosophy practiced by the likes of Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus, offers a roadmap to freedom. When you live by Stoic laws, no one can control you. Not your fears, not the external pressures, not the distractions of modern society. The only thing that can control you is your own mind. This is how you can break free from manipulation and lead a life of peace, purpose, and power. Every moment of your life is a crossroads. You stand at the intersection of what happens to you and how you choose to respond. Most people never realize they're standing there. They believe life is something that happens to them, a series of events they must endure, react to, or survive. But the Stoics knew a secret that has echoed through millennia. The most powerful force in your life is not what happens around you, but what happens within you. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, wrote in his Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. This is not just poetic wisdom. It's a declaration of war against manipulation. When you understand that your perceptions shape your reality, you reclaim the throne of your own mind. No one can make you feel inferior, anxious, or afraid without your consent. They can only present circumstances. You choose the meaning. Consider this. Someone insults you. The words leave their mouth, travel through the air, and reach your ears. But what happens next? That's where your power lies. You can choose to feel wounded, to internalize the attack, to carry it with you for days. Or you can recognize it for what it is, an external event over which you have no control. The insult exists in the space between their intention and your interpretation. And in that space, you are free. This is what Epictetus called the dichotomy of control. He divided all things into two categories, those within our control and those beyond it. Within our control are our thoughts, our judgments, our desires, and our responses. Beyond our control is nearly everything else. Other people's opinions, the weather, the economy, the past, and even much of the future. When you spend your energy trying to control what cannot be controlled, you become a puppet. When you focus solely on what you can control, your own mind and actions, you become unshakable. Think about the last time you felt manipulated. Maybe someone used guilt to make you do something you didn't want to do. Maybe advertising convinced you that you needed something you didn't. Maybe social pressure made you conform to expectations that weren't yours. In each case, the manipulation succeeded because you gave away your power of choice. You allowed an external force to dictate your internal state. But here's the liberating truth. Manipulation only works when you're unconscious of your choices. The moment you become aware that you're choosing, always choosing, the game changes. You're no longer a victim of circumstance. You're an active participant in your own life. Someone can try to make you feel guilty, but guilt is a choice you make. Someone can try to make you angry, but anger is a response you select. Someone can try to make you afraid, but fear is a perception you adopt. This doesn't mean your feelings aren't real. They are, but they're not inevitable. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies your freedom. The Stoics called this prohairesis, your faculty of choice your moral will. It's the one thing that can never be taken from you unless you surrender it willingly. Living by this law means developing a practice of awareness. Before you react to anything, pause. Ask yourself, is this within my control? If it's not, why am I spending energy on it? If it is, what response aligns with my values? This simple practice transforms you from a reactive being into a deliberate one. You stop being blown about by every wind of circumstance and stand firm in your own power. The manipulation tactics that work on most people, fear, desire, social proof, scarcity, all rely on unconscious reactions. They bypass your rational mind and trigger automatic responses. But when you practice the power of choice, you insert consciousness into the equation. You see the manipulation for what it is. You recognize that someone is trying to move you from your center, and you choose whether to allow it. This is not about becoming cold or unfeeling. It's about becoming sovereign. You can still care deeply, love fully, and engage passionately with life, but you do so from a place of choice, not compulsion. You give your energy where you decide it should go, not where others try to extract it. You respond to life rather than react to it, and in that response lies your dignity, your freedom, and your power. The first Stoic law is simple but profound. You always have a choice, not about what happens, but about what it means and how you respond. When you live by this law, manipulation becomes impossible, because manipulation requires unconsciousness, and you have chosen to wake up. There's a paradox at the heart of human suffering. The things we cling to most tightly are the things that cause us the most pain. We attach ourselves to outcomes, to people, to possessions, to our own ideas of how life should be. And in that attachment, we create vulnerability. We hand over the keys to our peace of mind to forces beyond our control. We become desperate, anxious, and easily manipulated. The Stoics understood this deeply, and they offered a radical solution: detachment. Detachment is perhaps the most misunderstood principle in Stoic philosophy. It doesn't mean not caring. It doesn't mean becoming emotionally numb or withdrawing from life. True Stoic detachment means caring deeply while holding loosely. It means engaging fully with life while understanding that you don't own the outcomes. It means loving without needing, hoping without demanding, and striving without depending on results for your peace. Seneca wrote, "He who fears death will never do anything worthy of a living man." What he understood was that our attachments, particularly to life itself, create a kind of hostage situation within our own minds. When we become too attached to anything, we give it power over us. And anything with power over us can be used to manipulate us. Want to control someone? Find out what they're attached to and threaten it. Want to be free? Release your death grip on outcomes. Consider how attachment shows up in your daily life. You're attached to being right in an argument, so someone can manipulate you by challenging your ego. You're attached to your job, so your employer can exploit your fear of losing it. You're attached to someone's approval, so they can control you by withholding it. You're attached to a certain image of yourself, so advertising can exploit your insecurity. Attachment is the hook upon which manipulation hangs. But here's what detachment offers. When you release your grip on specific outcomes, you can no longer be threatened or bribed. If you're not attached to winning the argument, no one can manipulate you through your pride. If you're not desperately attached to your job, you can't be exploited through fear. If you don't need someone's approval, they can't control you by giving or withholding it. Detachment is armor. This doesn't mean you stop trying or caring. Marcus Aurelius was the emperor of Rome, a position that required immense dedication and care. Yet he practiced detachment. He did his duty excellently while understanding that the outcomes were not ultimately within his control. He could control his efforts, his character, his responses. He couldn't control whether his policies would succeed, whether his enemies would be defeated, whether history would judge him kindly. So he let go of those outcomes and focused on what he could control, being virtuous in the present moment. The practice of detachment begins with recognition. Notice what you're clinging to. What outcomes are you attached to? Whose approval do you crave? What possessions or positions define your identity? What future are you desperately trying to secure? Each attachment is a potential manipulation point. Each one makes you vulnerable. Then comes the practice of loosening your grip. This isn't about not wanting things or not working toward goals. It's about holding your desires with an open hand. You can prefer certain outcomes while being at peace with alternatives. You can love people while accepting that they will eventually leave or change. You can work hard toward success while understanding that failure is always possible and that your worth isn't determined by the result. The Stoics practiced what they called premeditation of evils, intentionally imagining loss, failure, and death. This wasn't morbid pessimism. It was training in detachment. By mentally rehearsing the worst-case scenarios, they learned to hold their blessings lightly and to prepare themselves emotionally for change. When you've already imagined losing everything, no one can threaten you with loss. You've already made peace with it. This creates a remarkable kind of freedom. When you're detached from outcomes, you can act with complete authenticity. You don't have to perform, people please, or compromise your values to secure what you want, because you're not desperately attached to getting it. You can speak truth without fear. You can take risks without anxiety. You can fail without shame. You become unmanipulatable because there's nothing anyone can dangle in front of you that controls your inner state. Detachment also brings clarity. When you're desperately attached to something, your vision becomes distorted. You see what you want to see. You make poor decisions driven by fear or desire. But when you're detached, you see clearly. You can assess situations objectively. You make wise choices based on reason rather than reactive choices based on attachment. The law of detachment teaches us that true strength comes not from grasping tightly, but from holding loosely. Not from needing, but from preferring. Not from depending on outcomes, but from finding peace regardless of them. When you live this way, manipulation loses its power. Because manipulation works by threatening what you're attached to, and you've learned to attach yourself only to what can never be taken. Your character, your choices, your inner freedom. Know thyself. These two words, inscribed at the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, contain perhaps the most powerful defense against manipulation ever articulated. The Stoics elevated self-knowledge from mere advice to a sacred practice. They understood something profound. You cannot be manipulated if you truly know yourself. Because manipulation works by exploiting the gap between who you are and who you think you are. It thrives in self-deception, hidden motives, and unexamined beliefs. Self-reflection closes that gap and renders you transparent to yourself and therefore resistant to external influence. Manipulation is a game played in the shadows of your psyche. A skilled manipulator reads you better than you read yourself. They identify your insecurities, your unacknowledged desires, your blind spots. They know what buttons to push because you haven't examined those buttons yourself. But when you engage in rigorous self-reflection, you illuminate those shadows. You discover your own buttons before anyone else can push them. You understand your motivations, your triggers, your patterns, and in that understanding, you find freedom. Marcus Aurelius kept a journal, what we now know as his meditations. These weren't written for publication. They were private exercises in self-examination. Each night, he would reflect on his day. Where did I act according to my principles? Where did I fail? What triggered my anger? What attachment caused my anxiety? This wasn't self-flagellation, it was self-knowledge. By examining himself honestly, without judgment but with clarity, he became increasingly difficult to manipulate. He knew his weaknesses, so he could guard them. He knew his values, so he couldn't be swayed from them. Self-reflection begins with simple questions. Who am I? Not who do I pretend to be, not who do others think I am, not who I wish I were, but who am I actually? What do I truly value versus what do I say I value? What am I afraid of? What am I running toward? What am I running from? These questions are uncomfortable because they require honesty, but that discomfort is the price of freedom. Most people live their entire lives without truly knowing themselves. They operate on autopilot, driven by conditioning they've never examined. They inherit beliefs from their culture, their family, their media diet, and mistake these inherited ideas for their own. They react to triggers they don't understand. They pursue goals that aren't actually theirs. They're strangers to themselves, and strangers are easy to manipulate. The practice of self-reflection creates what the Stoics called prosophe, attention or mindfulness. It's a constant vigilance over your own thoughts, judgments, and reactions. Not a paranoid self-monitoring, but a gentle, curious awareness. When you feel anger rising, you notice it. When you feel the pull of desire, you examine it. When you're about to make a choice, you pause and ask, is this aligned with my values? Or am I being moved by fear, by social pressure, by conditioning? Journaling is one of the most powerful tools for self-reflection. The act of writing forces clarity. You can't write vague feelings. You have to articulate them. In articulating them, you understand them better. You see patterns. You notice that the same triggers keep appearing. You recognize that certain people or situations consistently pull you away from your center. With this knowledge, you can prepare. You can develop strategies. You can choose different responses. Meditation is another essential practice. In stillness, without the constant distraction of external input, you meet yourself. You discover what thoughts arise unbidden. You notice the endless commentary your mind provides. You see how much of what you think is just noise, repetitive, unhelpful, not even originally yours. And in seeing this, you gain distance from it. You realize you are not your thoughts. You are the awareness observing your thoughts. This realization is tremendously liberating because it means you can choose which thoughts to follow and which to let pass. Self-reflection also reveals your core values. What do you actually stand for? Not what you should stand for according to society, but what genuinely matters to you. When you know your values deeply, decisions become simpler. Someone tries to manipulate you into doing something that violates your values, and you immediately recognize the incongruence. You don't need to deliberate or rationalize. You simply know it's not aligned with who you are. But perhaps the most important gift of self-reflection is authenticity. When you know yourself, you can be yourself. You don't need to perform for others because you're not performing for yourself. You're not pretending to be someone you're not. so you're not vulnerable to being exposed. You don't have a false image to protect, so you can't be threatened with its destruction. You are simply, transparently, authentically you. And authentic people are nearly impossible to manipulate because they have nothing to hide and nothing to prove. The law of self-reflection demands daily practice. It's not a one-time insight, but an ongoing discipline. Each day, take time to examine your inner life. What moved you today? What disturbed your peace? Where did you compromise your values? Where did you act with integrity? What do you need to understand better about yourself? This practice doesn't make you perfect. It makes you aware. And awareness is the foundation of freedom. When you live by the law of self-reflection, manipulation attempts become obvious. You see them coming because you know yourself too well to be deceived. You recognize when someone is appealing to an insecurity you've already examined and made peace with. You notice when someone is trying to trigger a reaction you've learned to control. You catch the manipulation in real time because you've studied the instrument, yourself, that manipulators try to play. And an instrument that knows itself cannot be played by anyone else. Picture a lake on a windless day, perfectly still, mirroring the sky with flawless clarity. Now imagine that same lake during a storm, churning, murky, reflecting nothing. Your mind is that lake, and equanimity is the quality that keeps it still regardless of the weather. The Stoics prized this quality above almost all others because they recognized a fundamental truth. A disturbed mind cannot think clearly, cannot choose wisely, and is desperately vulnerable to manipulation. Equanimity, that unshakable inner calm, is not just pleasant, it's strategic, it's survival, it's freedom. The word equanimity comes from the Latin equanimitas, evenness of mind. It's the ability to maintain your composure whether fortune smiles or frowns, whether you're praised or criticized, whether you win or lose. It's not suppressing your emotions or pretending not to care. It's developing such a profound understanding of the nature of reality that external circumstances cannot throw you off balance. When you possess equanimity, you become like a rock in a stream. The water rushes around you, but you remain unmoved. Consider how manipulation typically works. Someone wants to control your behavior, so they create an emotional storm. They make you angry, so you'll act rashly. They make you afraid, so you'll accept what you otherwise wouldn't. They make you excited, so you'll abandon your judgment. They make you ashamed, so you'll comply with their demands. Every manipulation technique relies on disturbing your equanimity, because a mind in turmoil is a mind easily directed. But a mind at peace cannot be moved except by reason and principle. Marcus Aurelius faced countless attempts at manipulation. As emperor, he was constantly surrounded by flatterers seeking favor, advisors pushing agendas, enemies sowing discord, and circumstances threatening chaos. Yet he maintained his equanimity by remembering one essential truth. Everything is opinion. What disturbed him wasn't the external event itself, but his judgment about it. Someone insults him. That's just words, just opinion. His army suffers a defeat. That's just events, just circumstances. His health fails. That's just the body, temporary and mortal. None of these things could disturb his mind unless he let them. The practice of equanimity begins with understanding the nature of emotions. Your emotions are not inflicted upon you by external events. They are created by your judgments about those events. Someone cuts you off in traffic and you feel anger, but not because the action itself contains anger. The anger arises from your judgment. They shouldn't have done that. They're disrespecting me. This is unfair. Change the judgment. Perhaps they're rushing to an emergency. Perhaps they didn't see me. Perhaps this is insignificant in the grand scope of my life. And the anger dissolves. The external event remains the same. What changed was your internal interpretation. This understanding gives you tremendous power. It means you're not at the mercy of circumstances. You don't have to wait for life to calm down before you can be peaceful. You can be peaceful right now, in the middle of chaos, by choosing equanimity. This doesn't mean you become passive or indifferent. You can still act decisively, work energetically, and care deeply. But you do so from a place of calm rather than emotional reactivity. The Stoics practiced specific techniques to cultivate equanimity. One was the view from above, imagining yourself from a cosmic perspective, seeing your troubles as tiny and temporary in the vast scope of time and space. From this perspective, most of what disturbs you appears insignificant. Another technique was remembering mortality, both your own and that of everything you encounter. This person who's angering you will one day be dust. This setback that's frustrating you will be forgotten. This achievement you're celebrating will fade. When you hold this perspective, equanimity becomes natural. They also practiced what Epictetus called the reserve clause. When pursuing any goal, they would add internally, "I will do this if nothing prevents me," or "I will achieve this, fate willing." This mental habit prevented disappointment and maintained equanimity. They engaged fully with life's challenges while maintaining an inner detachment from specific outcomes. They did their best and accepted whatever resulted with equal calm. Equanimity is particularly powerful against emotional manipulation. When someone tries to make you angry to control you, your equanimity neutralizes the attempt. The anger doesn't arise, so their manipulation fails. When someone tries to frighten you into compliance, your equanimity allows you to assess the actual risk rationally rather than reacting from fear. When someone tries to excite you into a poor decision, your equanimity keeps you grounded in careful thought. You become unmanipulatable because you refuse to be emotionally destabilized. This doesn't make you cold or robotic. In fact, equanimity allows for deeper, more authentic emotional experiences. When you're not constantly blown about by reactive emotions, you can choose your emotional responses consciously. You can be appropriately angry at injustice, but it's a chosen, controlled anger that serves your values, not a reactive rage that controls you. You can feel genuine joy at success, but it's not a desperate, clinging joy that makes you vulnerable. You can experience sadness at loss, but it's a clean sadness that honors what was, not a destructive grief that consumes you. Living by the law of equanimity means committing to the daily practice of mental calm. It means catching yourself when circumstances begin to disturb your peace and remembering. This is just an event, just a circumstance. It's not inherently good or bad. It's my judgment that makes it so. And I can choose my judgment. This practice transforms your relationship with life. You stop being a victim of circumstances and become their master. You stop reacting and start responding. You stop being manipulated and start being free. When you maintain equanimity, you project an energy that actually repels manipulation attempts. Manipulators sense that their usual tactics won't work on you. Your calm is disarming. Your centeredness is intimidating. Your refusal to be emotionally reactive makes you unprofitable as a target. They move on to easier prey, those whose minds are already churning with fear, desire, and emotional reactivity. You remain like that still lake, reflecting reality clearly, disturbed by nothing, free. There's a peculiar irony in human nature. The very things we resist most strongly are often the things we cannot change. We exhaust ourselves fighting reality, demanding that it conform to our preferences, insisting that things should be different than they are. And in this futile struggle, we become weak, frustrated, and desperately vulnerable to anyone who promises to help us avoid the unavoidable. The Stoics discovered a profound secret. True freedom comes not from changing what we cannot change, but from accepting it completely. This is the law of acceptance, and it might be the most liberating and most difficult principle in all of Stoic philosophy. Acceptance is not resignation. It's not giving up, becoming passive, or endorsing things as they are. Acceptance is the clear-eyed recognition of reality as it actually exists, not as we wish it to be. It's the understanding that our preferences don't determine what is, and our resistance doesn't change what cannot be changed. When you accept what is, truly accept it, you stop wasting energy on futile resistance and redirect that energy toward what you actually can influence. This is strategic wisdom, not defeated surrender. The Stoics had a concept called amor fati, love of fate. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Accept whatever comes to you woven in the pattern of your destiny for what could more aptly fit your needs." This wasn't naive optimism or spiritual bypassing. It was the recognition that everything that happens is part of the causal chain of the universe, and fighting against it is like fighting against gravity. You can resist it all you want, but gravity remains. You can accept it and work with it, or you can exhaust yourself in pointless resistance. The choice determines whether you're free or enslaved. Consider how non-acceptance makes you vulnerable to manipulation. You refuse to accept that you're aging, so the beauty industry can exploit your denial. You refuse to accept that you're mortal, so you can be controlled through fear of death. You refuse to accept that others have different opinions, so you can be manipulated into endless, unwinnable arguments. You refuse to accept that outcomes are uncertain, so you grasp desperately at false promises of control. Every non-acceptance is a hook. Every resistance is a vulnerability. Every "it shouldn't be this way" is an opening for someone to offer you a comforting illusion, for a price. But what do you accept? Do you accept injustice? Do you accept cruelty? Do you accept oppression? Here's where the subtlety matters. You accept the reality that these things exist. You don't pretend the world is other than it is. But accepting that something exists doesn't mean approving of it or ceasing to work against it. The Stoic accepts that there is injustice in the world while simultaneously working to create justice. They accept that people suffer while actively trying to reduce suffering. The acceptance is of facts, not of values. It's recognizing what is, not endorsing what should be. This distinction is crucial because it prevents the paralysis of denial and the exhaustion of resistance while maintaining the energy for meaningful action. When you accept that the world contains problems, you stop wasting energy being shocked or outraged that problems exist. You channel that energy into solving them instead. When you accept that people sometimes behave badly, you stop being perpetually disappointed and start creating systems and relationships that account for human limitations. Acceptance is not passivity. It's clarity that enables effective action. The practice of acceptance begins with the present moment. Right now, whatever is happening is happening. Can you accept it? Not change it, not wish it were different, not explain why it shouldn't be happening. Just accept that it is happening. This moment, exactly as it is reality. Your acceptance or non-acceptance doesn't change the fact of it, but your acceptance or non-acceptance dramatically changes your experience of it and your ability to respond to it wisely. Then extend this acceptance to the unchangeable facts of existence. You will age. You will die. Others will die. You will sometimes fail. People will sometimes disappoint you. You cannot control what others think of you. You cannot force outcomes. The past cannot be changed. These are not sad facts requiring your emotional resistance. They are simply facts, neutral realities of existence. When you accept them fully, they lose their power to disturb you. And when they lose their power to disturb you, they lose their power to be used against you. The Stoics practiced negative visualization specifically to cultivate acceptance. They would imagine losing everything, their possessions, their loved ones, their health, their life. This wasn't pessimism. It was training in acceptance. By mentally rehearsing loss, they accepted in advance that loss is part of life. When actual loss occurred, they weren't destroyed by it because they'd already accepted its inevitability. They grieved, yes. They felt, yes. But they weren't broken because they'd never pretended that permanence was possible. This practice creates remarkable resilience. When you've accepted that anything can be lost, you hold everything gratefully, but not desperately. You enjoy without clinging. You love without needing permanence. You work toward goals while accepting that you might not reach them. This isn't reducing your investment in life. It's increasing your freedom within life. You're fully engaged, but not attached to specific outcomes. You're all in, but not dependent on particular results. This is the sweet spot of human flourishing. Acceptance also frees you from the manipulation of false hope. How many scams? How many bad relationships? How many terrible decisions are based on refusing to accept reality and grasping at promises that it can be different without the necessary effort or sacrifice? The diet pill that requires no discipline. The get-rich-quick scheme that requires no work. The relationship that will work if you just try hard enough to change the other person. These manipulations all exploit non-acceptance. They promise you an escape from reality. But when you've cultivated deep acceptance, these promises lose their appeal. You're not looking to escape reality. You've made peace with it. Perhaps the most powerful aspect of acceptance is how it transforms suffering. Pain is inevitable in life. Loss, illness, disappointment, death. But suffering is optional. Suffering is what happens when you add non-acceptance to pain. It's the layer of "this shouldn't be happening" on top of "this is happening." When you accept that pain is part of being human, the suffering layer dissolves. The pain remains, but it's clean pain, not amplified by resistance. You can experience it, work with it, and move through it without the additional agony of fighting against reality. Living by the law of acceptance means developing a daily practice of making peace with what is. Each time you notice yourself resisting reality, thinking, "this shouldn't be happening," or "they shouldn't be this way," or "I should be different," pause. Ask yourself, is this resistance changing reality, or is it just creating suffering? Then practice accepting what is while still acting according to your values. Accept that the problem exists. Accept that you feel how you feel. Accept that others are who they are. Then, from that place of acceptance, choose your response. When you master acceptance, you become unmanipulatable in a fundamental way. You can't be controlled through fear of what might happen because you've accepted that anything might happen. You can't be controlled through promises of avoiding the unavoidable because you've accepted the unavoidable. You can't be destabilized by circumstances because you've accepted that circumstances change. You stand like an ancient oak tree, rooted in acceptance of the changing seasons, flexible in the wind, strong in the storm, free because you've stopped fighting reality and learned to dance with it instead. This is the culmination of the awakening. You've learned to focus on what you control. You've learned to hold lightly to outcomes. You've learned to know yourself deeply. You've learned to maintain equanimity. And now you've learned to accept what is. Together, these 5 laws form an impenetrable shield against manipulation. Because manipulation requires that you be unconscious, attached, self-deceived, emotionally reactive, and resistant to reality. And you are none of these things anymore. You are awake, detached, self-aware, calm, and accepting. You are free. Most people spend their lives trying not to think about bad things. They avoid contemplating loss, failure, suffering, and death. They believe that focusing on the positive and hoping for the best is the path to happiness. The Stoics knew better. They understood that the mind unprepared for adversity is a mind easily shattered by it. So they developed one of the most counterintuitive yet powerful psychological practices ever conceived. Premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. By deliberately imagining the worst that could happen, they built a fortress of resilience that no manipulation or misfortune could breach. Imagine waking up each morning and spending a few minutes contemplating everything you could lose that day. Your health could fail, your loved ones could die, your job could disappear, your reputation could be destroyed, your possessions could be taken. Sounds morbid, doesn't it? Depressing, even. But here's what the Stoics discovered. When you regularly imagine loss, you accomplish something remarkable. You inoculate yourself against the shock of actual loss. You appreciate what you have more deeply, and most importantly, you become immune to threats because you've already made peace with the worst-case scenario. Seneca wrote, "The man who has anticipated the coming of troubles takes away their power when they arrive." This is the essence of negative visualization. It's not pessimism or catastrophizing. It's strategic mental preparation. It's the difference between a soldier who has trained for every scenario and one who goes into battle assuming everything will go smoothly. When chaos erupts, the prepared soldier responds effectively. The unprepared one freezes, panics, or breaks. Your mind is that soldier, and negative visualization is its training. Consider how manipulation typically works through threats. Someone threatens your job security unless you comply with unethical requests. Someone threatens to leave you unless you meet their demands. Someone threatens your reputation unless you stay silent about wrongdoing. These threats have power only if you're unprepared for the loss they threaten. But what if you've already imagined losing your job, already contemplated being alone, already accepted that your reputation might be damaged? The threat loses its leverage. You're not paralyzed by fear because you've already walked through that fear mentally and survived. The practice of negative visualization begins simply. Each morning, before the day takes over, sit quietly and imagine specific losses or difficulties. Don't just think about them abstractly. Visualize them vividly. Imagine receiving the call that a loved one has died. Feel the grief. Imagine the financial consequences of losing your job. Experience the uncertainty. Imagine your most valued relationship ending. Sit with the loneliness. This isn't pleasant, but it's profoundly strengthening. What happens in this practice is psychological desensitization combined with values clarification. By repeatedly imagining loss, your nervous system learns that imagining loss doesn't kill you. The fear loses its intensity. You realize you could survive these things. But more than survival, you gain perspective. When you imagine losing something, you suddenly see its value more clearly. That person you take for granted becomes precious when you imagine life without them. That health you ignore becomes a gift when you imagine disease. Negative visualization doesn't make you appreciate things less. It makes you appreciate them more. The Stoics also practiced negative visualization to prepare for specific challenges. Before a difficult conversation, they would imagine it going badly. Before a competition, they would imagine losing. Before a journey, they would imagine dangers and delays. This wasn't defeatism, it was preparation. By imagining obstacles in advance, they could plan responses. They weren't caught off guard. When difficulties arose, as they inevitably did, the Stoics could respond with, "Ah, yes, I anticipated this possibility. Here's what I'll do." Modern psychology has validated this ancient practice through research on mental simulation and stress inoculation. Studies show that people who mentally rehearse difficulties handle actual difficulties better. Athletes who visualize both success and potential failures perform better under pressure than those who visualize only success. The military uses stress inoculation training, exposing soldiers to simulated combat stress to prepare them for real combat. The Stoics were doing this 2,000 years ago, and they were doing it for everyday life. Negative visualization also works against a specific type of manipulation, the creation of artificial urgency or scarcity. Marketers manipulate you by suggesting that if you don't buy now, you'll lose out forever. Relationships manipulate you by suggesting that if you don't comply now, you'll lose love forever. Employers manipulate you by suggesting that if you don't sacrifice now, you'll lose your career forever. But when you've practiced negative visualization, you've already contemplated these losses. You know you'd survive them. The artificial urgency loses its power because you're not afraid of the threatened loss. Perhaps most powerfully, negative visualization prepares you for the ultimate reality, death, both your own and that of everyone you love. The Stoics meditated on death constantly, not morbidly but realistically. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that he might not live through the day. Seneca wrote about how we're all dying from the moment we're born. This radical acceptance of mortality freed them from the fear that controls most people. When you've truly accepted that you will die, that everyone you love will die, that everything is temporary, you become unfathomably free. No one can threaten you with mortality because you've already faced it. But let's be clear about what negative visualization is not. It's not rumination, that repetitive, unproductive worry that spirals into anxiety. Rumination focuses on how bad things feel and offers no resolution. Negative visualization, by contrast, is structured, time-limited, and solution-focused. You imagine the difficulty, you feel it, you consider your response, and then you return to the present moment with greater clarity and strength. It's a practice you control, not a thought pattern that controls you. Neither is negative visualization an excuse to not hope, not try, or not invest in good outcomes. The Stoics were not pessimists who expected the worst. They hoped for the best while preparing for the worst. They worked energetically towards success while accepting that failure was possible. Negative visualization didn't dampen their enthusiasm for life. It deepened their engagement with it. When you know something is temporary and could be lost, you don't take it for granted. You savor it, you honor it, you give it your full presence. The practice also cultivates gratitude, which is itself a powerful defense against manipulation. When you regularly imagine not having what you have, you're filled with appreciation for having it. This gratitude makes you less vulnerable to manipulations based on discontent. Advertising works by making you feel that what you have isn't enough. But when you've practiced negative visualization, you're acutely aware of how much you have. You're content not from complacency, but from perspective. And content people are difficult to manipulate through manufactured desire. Living by the law of negative visualization means making it a daily discipline. Each morning, spend 5 minutes imagining loss. Each evening, reflect on how the things you worried about either didn't happen or weren't as devastating as feared. Before important events, visualize them going wrong and plan your response. When you notice yourself taking something for granted, pause and imagine it gone. This constant practice builds a mental resilience that transforms how you move through the world. When you've integrated negative visualization into your life, you develop what the Stoics called the pre-rehearsal mindset. Nothing catches you completely off guard because you've mentally rehearsed the categories of difficulty. This doesn't mean you're never surprised or never hurt. It means you're never destroyed. You bend but don't break. You grieve but don't shatter. You feel but don't fracture. And because you've built this internal stability through practice, external forces cannot easily destabilize you. You've looked into the void and found that you can stare back. And in that profound act of psychological courage, you've become unmanipulatable through fear. There's a moment in every life when someone asks you to compromise, to cut a corner, to tell a small lie, to betray a trust, to violate a principle, just this once, just a little bit, just to make things easier. In that moment, everything hangs in the balance, not just the immediate situation, but your entire relationship with yourself. The Stoics understood that integrity, the wholeness and consistency between your values and your actions, is not just a moral nicety, it's the foundation of an unmanipulatable life. Because when you know who you are and what you stand for, and you refuse to deviate from it, you become like bedrock, immovable, incorruptible, free. Integrity comes from the Latin integritas, meaning wholeness or completeness. A person of integrity is whole. Their inner values and outer actions form a seamless unity. What they believe and what they do are aligned. There's no gap, no contradiction, no hidden part that contradicts the visible part. This wholeness is tremendously powerful because it means there's nothing to exploit. A manipulator looks for inconsistencies, hypocrisies, and hidden shames, the gaps between who you claim to be and who you actually are. But a person of genuine integrity has no such gaps. What you see is what there is. Marcus Aurelius faced constant pressure to compromise his integrity. As emperor, he could have indulged any desire, ignored any principle, committed any injustice with impunity. The power was there, the temptation was there. But he chose integrity instead. He wrote, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." This wasn't just about being good, it was about being whole. It was about the profound power that comes from knowing your principles and living them regardless of circumstances or incentives. Consider how manipulation targets integrity. Someone offers you a bribe. They're testing whether your principles can be bought. Someone asks you to lie for them. They're testing whether your honesty is conditional. Someone pressures you to betray a confidence. They're testing whether your loyalty is negotiable. Every manipulation of this kind is probing for the price at which you'll abandon your integrity. And every time you refuse, you strengthen the fortress. Every time you compromise, you create a crack they can exploit further. The insidious thing about integrity violations is that they compound. The first compromise is always the hardest. You tell yourself it's just once, just a small thing, nobody will know. It's not really that important. But that first compromise makes the second one easier. Soon you're on a slope that steepens with each step. Before you know it, you've become someone you don't recognize, someone easily manipulated because you've already demonstrated that your principles are flexible. The Stoics knew this danger. That's why they drew their lines absolutely and defended them uncompromisingly. But integrity isn't just about refusing to do wrong. It's about actively committing to do right according to your values. This requires first knowing what your values are. Most people haven't done this work. They operate with a vague, inherited sense of right and wrong that they've never examined. When pressure comes, they don't know where they stand because they've never established their ground. The Stoic practice begins with values clarification. What do I truly believe? What principles will I not violate? What kind of person do I want to be? Epictetus taught that we should establish our principles when we're calm and then follow them when we're tested. Don't wait until you're in the middle of a crisis to decide whether you'll lie, steal, cheat, or betray. Decide now, in advance, with clarity. This is your code. These are your lines. Then, when the moment of testing comes, you don't deliberate. You simply refer to your pre-established principles and act accordingly. This removes the agonizing uncertainty that makes people vulnerable to rationalization and manipulation. Integrity also requires consistency across contexts. You don't get to be honest with friends, but dishonest in business. You don't get to be compassionate to those you like, but cruel to those you don't. You don't get to uphold principles when it's convenient, but abandon them when it's costly. True integrity means being the same person in every context, with every person, in every situation. This is exhausting to fake, which is why so few people achieve it. But it's natural when it's genuine, which is why it's worth pursuing. The cost of integrity is real. You might lose opportunities that require compromise. You might lose relationships that demand your complicity. You might lose money, status, or comfort by refusing to bend. The Stoics didn't pretend these costs weren't real. They simply believed the costs of lost integrity were far higher. Seneca wrote, "A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials." The trials that test your integrity are the friction that polishes your character. And character is the only possession you truly own. Here's what integrity gives you in return: self-respect. When you live according to your principles, when you do what you believe is right, even when it's difficult, you can look at yourself in the mirror without shame. This self-respect is the foundation of a contented life. External validation becomes less important because you have internal validation. You know you're living with integrity. This makes you extraordinarily difficult to manipulate because you're not desperately seeking approval, not hiding shameful compromises, not vulnerable to exposure. Integrity also gives you clarity in decision-making. When you have clear principles and commit to following them, most decisions become simple. Not easy, but simple. Someone asks you to do something that violates your principles. The answer is no. An opportunity arises that requires you to be someone other than who you are. You decline. A situation demands you choose between convenience and integrity. You choose integrity. This clarity eliminates the exhausting deliberation and rationalization that characterizes the lives of those without firm principles. The practice of integrity requires daily vigilance. Each day presents small tests, opportunities to cut corners, shade the truth, avoid responsibility, or compromise your values for convenience. The Stoics recommended a daily review. Did I act with integrity today? Where did I succeed? Where did I fail? This honest accounting keeps you aligned with your principles and prevents the gradual drift that leads to moral compromise. But integrity isn't rigidity. It's not about blind adherence to rules or inability to adapt. The Stoics distinguished between principles and preferences. Principles are non-negotiable. They're the core values that define who you are. Preferences are flexible. They're the things you like, but can adjust based on circumstances. Integrity means being flexible about everything except your core principles. You adapt, you compromise, you negotiate, but never at the cost of who you fundamentally are. Perhaps the most profound aspect of living with integrity is how it transforms your relationship with fear. Most fear is rooted in the possibility of exposure. The fear that others will discover who you really are, what you really did, the ways you've compromised yourself. But when you live with integrity, there's nothing to expose. You are openly who you are. Your actions match your words. Your private self and public self are the same. This congruence eliminates a huge category of fear, and with it, a huge category of vulnerability to manipulation. Living by the law of integrity means committing to an examined life guided by clear principles. It means doing the hard work of defining what you stand for and then standing for it regardless of cost. It means being the same person in every context and weathering the consequences. It means accepting that you'll lose some things by refusing to compromise, but gaining the one thing that matters most, yourself, whole and uncompromised. When you live this way, manipulation becomes impossible, not because you've built defenses against it, but because you've removed the very thing it seeks to exploit, the gap between who you are and who you claim to be. You are whole. You are integral. You are free. There's a particular kind of desperation that makes people easy to control. It's the desperation of needing something from others that you believe you cannot give yourself. Approval, validation, worth, purpose, happiness. When you believe these things come from external sources, you become dependent on those sources, and anything you depend on can be used to manipulate you. The Stoics recognized this trap and offered a radical solution: self-sufficiency. Not isolation, not independence from all human connection, but the profound psychological self-reliance that comes from finding within yourself what most people seek from others. The Greek word the Stoics used was autarkeia, self-sufficiency or contentment arising from within. Epictetus taught that true freedom comes when you need nothing outside yourself to be complete. This doesn't mean you don't value relationships, don't pursue goals, or don't engage with the world. It means your fundamental sense of worth, purpose, and peace isn't hostage to external circumstances or other people's opinions. You have an internal anchor that holds steady regardless of external weather. Think about how much of your behavior is driven by seeking external validation. You post something on social media and anxiously check for likes. You dress a certain way, hoping others will approve. You take a job not because it aligns with your values, but because it impresses people. You stay in a relationship not because it's healthy, but because you fear being alone. You agree to things you don't want to do because you need others to think well of you. Each of these behaviors is a manipulation vulnerability. Someone who controls the validation you seek controls you. Marcus Aurelius, despite being the most powerful man in the world, constantly reminded himself not to depend on others' opinions for his peace of mind. He wrote, "I have often wondered how it is that every man loves himself more than all the rest of men, but yet sets less value on his own opinion of himself than on the opinion of others." This is the paradox. We claim to value ourselves, yet we let others determine our value. Self-sufficiency is the resolution of this paradox. It's genuinely valuing your own opinion of yourself above all others. The journey towards self-sufficiency begins with a crucial question. What do I actually need from others? Make a list. Not what you want, but what you genuinely need for your well-being and flourishing. You'll probably find the list is shorter than you thought. You need some connection, some cooperation for practical matters, perhaps some specific knowledge or skills. But you don't need constant approval. You don't need to be liked by everyone. You don't need external validation of your worth. These are wants that have been disguised as needs, and this disguise makes you vulnerable. Next, examine where you're outsourcing your internal states. Are you relying on others to make you happy, to give you purpose, to tell you you're worthwhile? The Stoics would say you're giving away your power. Happiness is an inside job. It comes from virtue, from living according to your values, from engaging meaningfully with life. Purpose isn't given to you by others. It's chosen by you based on what you care about. Worth isn't determined by others' opinions. It's inherent in your humanity and demonstrated by your character. When you reclaim these things as internal, you become unmanipulatable through their absence or presence in others' treatment of you. Self-sufficiency requires developing what psychologists now call an internal locus of control, the belief that you are the primary agent of your life. People with an external locus of control believe their outcomes are determined by external forces, luck, other people, circumstances. They feel powerless and are easily manipulated because they're already convinced they're not in control. People with an internal locus believe their outcomes are primarily determined by their own choices and efforts. They feel empowered and are difficult to manipulate because they're not looking outside themselves for the source of their life's direction. The Stoics practiced self-sufficiency through several disciplines. One was learning to be content with little. They regularly practiced voluntary poverty, eating simple food, wearing simple clothes, sleeping on hard beds, to prove to themselves that they didn't need luxury or comfort to be content. This wasn't asceticism for its own sake. It was training in self-sufficiency. They were demonstrating to themselves that their peace didn't depend on external conditions. This made them immune to manipulation through threats of deprivation or promises of luxury. Another practice was finding validation internally through the examination of conscience. Each day, the Stoics would review their actions not against others' standards, but against their own principles. Did I act with integrity? Did I live according to my values? Did I respond to challenges with wisdom and virtue? When the answer was yes, they felt genuine self-respect that no one could take away. When the answer was no, they learned from it without needing others to reassure them or excuse them. This internal validation system freed them from the tyranny of public opinion. Self-sufficiency also means cultivating your own sources of meaning and joy. Don't rely solely on your relationship for happiness. Don't rely solely on your job for purpose. Don't rely solely on others' recognition for your sense of accomplishment. Develop diverse sources of meaning, personal projects, creative pursuits, physical practices, intellectual interests, spiritual disciplines. This diversification does two things. It makes you more interesting and capable, and it makes you less vulnerable. If one source falters, you have others. You're not devastated by any single loss, because your well-being doesn't rest on a single fragile foundation. But here's a crucial nuance. Self-sufficiency is not the same as isolation or emotional invulnerability. The Stoics valued relationships deeply. Marcus Aurelius wrote beautifully about his family and teachers. Seneca corresponded warmly with friends. Epictetus taught students with obvious care. Self-sufficiency doesn't mean not needing or loving others. It means not needing them to complete you or validate you. It means choosing connection from wholeness rather than seeking connection from need. This distinction is everything. A self-sufficient person in a relationship loves generously without needing the relationship to define their worth. They contribute fully without keeping score. They're vulnerable and open without being dependent or desperate. They can walk away from unhealthy dynamics because they know they'll be okay alone. This actually makes them better partners, better friends, better colleagues, because they're relating from freedom rather than need. And paradoxically, this non-neediness makes them more attractive and less vulnerable to manipulation. People who are desperate to keep a relationship will tolerate anything. People who are self-sufficient will tolerate only what aligns with their values. Self-sufficiency also protects you from consumer manipulation. Advertising works by making you feel insufficient, not attractive enough, not successful enough, not happy enough, and then offering a product to fill that gap. But when you've cultivated self-sufficiency, when you've learned to be content with yourself as you are, advertising loses much of its power. You see it for what it is, an attempt to create artificial need. You buy things because they're useful, not because they promise to make you complete. This saves you money, certainly, but more importantly, it saves you from the exhausting treadmill of trying to buy your way to adequacy. The practice of self-sufficiency requires daily reinforcement. Each morning, remind yourself, I am sufficient. I have everything I need to meet this day with wisdom and virtue. My worth is inherent, not earned. My peace comes from within, not from circumstances. Then, throughout the day, notice when you're seeking external validation or depending on others for your internal state. When you catch yourself, redirect. Ask yourself, what do I actually think about this? What brings me genuine satisfaction? What aligns with my values? Let your answers guide you, not others' reactions. Living by the law of self-sufficiency doesn't make you a stoic island, untouched and untouchable. It makes you a sovereign being who engages with others from choice rather than need, who contributes from abundance rather than seeking to extract, who loves from wholeness rather than grasping from emptiness. When you are self-sufficient, manipulation through withdrawal, through conditional approval, through promises of validation, all these tactics fail because you've already found within yourself what others are offering to sell or withhold. You are complete, and complete people cannot be controlled through the promise of completion. You are free. Emotions are powerful. They color our experience, drive our decisions, and shape our lives. But emotions are also easily manipulated. Fear can make you compliant. Anger can make you reckless. Desire can make you foolish. Shame can make you silent. Every manipulator knows this, which is why they target your emotions rather than your reason. They create emotional storms that cloud your judgment and make you act in ways you otherwise wouldn't. The Stoics understood this danger intimately, and they offered a powerful antidote: rationality. Not cold, unfeeling calculation, but the practice of engaging your reasoning mind especially when your emotions are screaming. The Stoics believed that reason is what separates humans from animals and what makes us capable of virtue. They called it logos, the rational principle that governs the universe and that we possess within ourselves. When we use our reason properly, we see reality clearly, make wise choices, and live according to nature. When we abandon reason and act purely from emotion, we become vulnerable to every manipulation, every passion, every impulse. Reason is not the enemy of emotion. It's the navigator that ensures emotion serves us rather than enslaves us. Consider a typical emotional manipulation. Someone makes you angry by insulting you. Then, while you're angry and not thinking clearly, they persuade you to agree to something you'd normally refuse. Or someone makes you afraid of an unlikely threat, then offers a solution that benefits them at your expense. Or someone makes you feel guilty about something you shouldn't feel guilty about, then leverages that guilt to extract concessions. In every case, the manipulation works by hijacking your emotional system and bypassing your rational evaluation. The emotion creates such a strong impulse to act that you don't stop to think. The Stoic practice of rationality begins with what they called the pause. When you feel a strong emotion arise, don't immediately act on it. Pause. In that pause, engage your rational mind. Ask yourself, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling it? Is this feeling based on accurate perception of reality? What would a wise person do in this situation? What action aligns with my principles? This simple practice of inserting rationality between stimulus and response transforms you from a reactive creature into a thoughtful one. And thoughtful people are extraordinarily difficult to manipulate. Marcus Aurelius practiced a technique he called objective representation. When something happened that triggered an emotional reaction, he would describe it to himself in purely factual terms, stripping away the emotional interpretation. Someone insults him? Objectively, it's just air vibrating in patterns, creating sounds. Someone steals from him? Objectively, it's just objects changing location. This wasn't denying reality or suppressing emotion. It was using reason to see beneath the emotional overlay to the bare facts. From this clear perception, he could choose a response based on wisdom rather than react from emotion. The Stoics also identified common cognitive distortions, what they called false impressions or fantasies, that lead to poor reasoning. We might call them by their modern names: catastrophizing, assuming the worst will happen; overgeneralizing, one setback means everything is ruined; personalizing, assuming everything is about you; emotional reasoning, believing something is true because you feel it strongly. These distortions hijack rational thinking and make you vulnerable to manipulation. Someone can catastrophize for you. If you don't do this, terrible things will happen. And if you don't catch the distortion, you'll be controlled by artificial fear. The practice of rationality requires training your mind to recognize these distortions in real time. When you notice a thought arising, examine it. Is this actually true? What evidence supports it? What evidence contradicts it? Am I generalizing from one instance? Am I assuming I know others' intentions? Am I confusing what I feel with what is? This kind of cognitive self-monitoring is exhausting at first, but with practice, it becomes automatic. Your rational mind becomes a vigilant guardian, catching distorted thinking before it leads to poor decisions. Rationality also means understanding the difference between what the Stoics called preferred indifference and genuine goods. A genuine good is virtue, acting with wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. Everything else, health, wealth, reputation, pleasure, is a preferred indifferent. You can prefer these things and work toward them, but they're not essential to your well-being or virtue. They're neutral. Manipulators exploit confusion about this distinction. They threaten preferred indifference, your job, your reputation, your comfort, and make you believe these threats are existential. But when you've used reason to clarify what's actually important, these threats lose their power. Losing your job is unfortunate, but it doesn't make you less virtuous. Losing your reputation is painful, but it doesn't change your character. Rationality provides this clarifying perspective. One of the most powerful rational practices is the art of questioning. When someone presents you with a claim, especially one that triggers strong emotions, question it. Who benefits if I believe this? What assumptions underlie this claim? What alternative explanations exist? What would change my mind? Is this appeal to emotion rather than evidence? This rational skepticism doesn't make you cynical or paranoid. It makes you discerning. You don't reject everything, you evaluate everything. And manipulations, when subjected to rational scrutiny, usually reveal themselves as logically bankrupt. The Stoics were particularly concerned with the manipulation technique of false dilemmas, presenting two options as if they're the only possibilities when many others exist. Either you do what I say, or you don't care about the relationship. Either you buy this product, or you're irresponsible. Either you agree with the group, or you're disloyal. Rationality cuts through these false dilemmas by asking, what other options exist? Why must I choose between only these two? Who decided these are the only alternatives? Often, there's a third way, a fourth way, many ways. But the manipulator wants to constrain your perception to only the options that benefit them. But let's address an important concern. Doesn't rationality make you cold, unfeeling, inhuman? Quite the opposite. The Stoics weren't advocating for suppressing emotions or becoming robotic. They were advocating for not being enslaved by emotions. There's a crucial difference between feeling emotions and being controlled by them. Rationality allows you to feel fully, to experience anger at injustice, fear in danger, joy in beauty, love in connection, while ensuring these feelings inform rather than dictate your actions. You feel the anger, but reason determines whether acting on it serves justice or just creates more harm. You feel the fear, but reason assesses whether the threat is real and what response is appropriate. In fact, rationality can deepen emotional life. When you're not constantly hijacked by reactive emotions, when you've learned to create space between feeling and action, you can actually experience emotions more fully and appropriately. You're not afraid of your emotions because you know you won't be controlled by them. This allows a kind of emotional courage. You can feel difficult emotions without having to immediately escape or act on them. This emotional courage is itself a defense against manipulation, because manipulators often rely on people's desperation to avoid uncomfortable feelings. The practice of rationality also connects to truth-seeking. The Stoics valued truth above comfort. They would rather face an uncomfortable truth than believe a comforting lie. This commitment to truth makes you resistant to manipulation through pleasant falsehoods. When someone tells you what you want to hear rather than what's true, your rational mind catches it. When someone appeals to your biases rather than evidence, you notice. When someone offers certainty where only probability exists, you're skeptical. This allegiance to truth over comfort, to accuracy over reassurance, is fundamentally anti-manipulation. Living by the law of rationality means making reason your partner in navigating life. It means pausing before reacting, questioning before believing, examining before concluding. It means training your mind to recognize cognitive distortions, false dilemmas, emotional hijacking, and logical fallacies. It means understanding that your feelings are real and valid, while also recognizing that they're not always accurate guides to reality or appropriate responses. It means being both emotionally alive and rationally awake. When you live this way, emotional manipulation becomes remarkably transparent. You see the attempted hijacking in real time. Someone tries to make you angry, so you'll act rashly, but your rational mind catches it. This person is trying to trigger me. Why? What do they want me to do while I'm angry? What would I do if I weren't angry? The manipulation fails because you've inserted rationality into the equation. You've refused to hand over the steering wheel to reactive emotion. You remain the captain of your own ship, navigating by reason even when emotional storms rage. And a ship with a rational captain cannot be easily blown off course. You remain free. There's a difference between controlling your emotions and mastering them. Control implies suppression, forcing feelings down, pretending they don't exist. Mastery implies understanding, working skillfully with emotions, directing their energy wisely. The Stoics have often been misunderstood as advocating for emotional control, a cold, repressive approach to feelings. But what they actually taught was emotional mastery, the ability to experience emotions fully while not being enslaved by them. This mastery is perhaps the most sophisticated defense against manipulation, because it allows you to remain emotionally alive and responsive while being immune to emotional exploitation. The foundation of emotional mastery is understanding what emotions actually are. The Stoics taught that emotions aren't imposed on us by external events. They're generated by our judgments about events. Someone insults you and you feel angry, but not because insults contain anger. The anger arises from your judgment. This person has wronged me. This is unacceptable. I must retaliate. Change the judgment to, this person is suffering and acting from their suffering, or this person's opinion reflects them, not me, and the anger dissolves or transforms. The external event remains identical. What changed was the internal judgment. This insight is revolutionary because it means you're not at the mercy of circumstances or other people for your emotional life. You're not a puppet whose emotional strings can be pulled by external events. You're the author of your emotional experience through the judgments you make. When you truly understand this, not just intellectually but experientially, you gain tremendous power. You realize that while you can't always control what happens, you can influence how you judge what happens, and your judgment determines your emotional response. Emotional mastery doesn't mean never feeling difficult emotions. It means feeling them consciously rather than unconsciously, responsively rather than reactively. When you've mastered your emotions, you still feel fear, but you're not controlled by it. You examine the fear. Is this danger real? Is this response proportionate? What's the wise action here? You still feel anger, but you're not enslaved by it. You investigate the anger. What boundary was violated? What values are at stake? Is this anger serving justice or just my ego? You still feel sadness, but you're not destroyed by it. You honor the sadness. What loss am I grieving? What did this mean to me? How do I carry this forward? This conscious relationship with emotions transforms them from vulnerabilities into information. Fear becomes a signal that something might threaten what you value, useful information if interpreted wisely. Anger becomes a signal that a boundary might have been crossed, valuable data if examined rationally. Sadness becomes a signal that you're processing loss, necessary work if done consciously. When you master emotions this way, manipulators can't use them against you. They can trigger the feelings, but they can't control your response to the feelings. The Stoics practiced specific techniques for emotional mastery. One was the discipline of assent, the practice of not immediately agreeing with your first emotional impression. An event happens, an emotion arises, and there's a split second where you can choose whether to assent to that emotion or examine it first. Most people unconsciously assent immediately. They feel anger and immediately identify with it. I'm angry. They feel fear and immediately act from it. I must escape. The Stoic practice is to catch that moment and pause. I'm experiencing anger. Is this anger warranted? What am I judging that's creating this anger? Epictetus taught his students to say, "You are just an impression, and not at all the thing you appear to be." This was directed at emotions and thoughts that arose. When fear comes, you acknowledge it. You're just fear, just an impression my mind has created based on a judgment about the future. This creates distance. You're not denying the fear, but you're not completely identified with it either. You're the observer of fear, not just the experiencer of it. From this position of observation, you have choice about how to respond. Another Stoic practice was the preemptive framing of emotional situations. Before entering a potentially triggering situation, they would prepare their minds. I'm about to encounter people who are angry, envious, and manipulative. This is the nature of humans who don't understand virtue. I won't be surprised or disturbed by this. I'll respond with patience and wisdom. This mental preparation didn't prevent emotions from arising, but it prevented those emotions from hijacking their responses. They'd already decided how they would handle their emotional reactions, so when the emotions came, they had a plan. The Stoics also distinguished between initial reactions, what they called proto-passions or first movements, and full-blown emotions. The first movement is involuntary. You hear a loud noise and experience a flash of fear. Your body responds physiologically. Heart rate increases, muscles tense. This is automatic and not something to judge yourself for. What matters is the second movement. What you do with that initial reaction. Do you let it cascade into panic, into a full emotional storm, or do you recognize it, breathe through it, and choose a measured response? Emotional mastery is about that second movement, about what you do with the automatic first response. Modern psychology has validated these Stoic insights through research on emotional regulation. Studies show that people who can observe their emotions without immediately acting on them have better mental health, better relationships, and better decision-making. The practice of naming to tame, simply labeling what you're feeling, creates neurological changes that reduce the emotion's intensity. When you say, "I'm feeling anxious," instead of just experiencing raw anxiety, you activate your prefrontal cortex and slightly deactivate your amygdala. You're using the conscious, rational part of your brain to modulate the emotional, reactive part. The Stoics understood this intuitively 2 millennia ago. Emotional mastery also involves understanding your personal emotional patterns. Through self-reflection and journaling, you discover your triggers. Maybe criticism from authority figures sends you into shame. Maybe perceived rejection triggers disproportionate anger. Maybe uncertainty triggers paralyzing anxiety. When you know your patterns, you can prepare for them. You can say, "My boss is about to give feedback, and I know I tend to feel shame when criticized. I'm going to remember that criticism is just information, not a verdict on my worth." This awareness doesn't prevent the shame from arising, but it prevents the shame from controlling your response. The integration of Stoic emotional mastery with modern emotional intelligence is profound. Emotional intelligence consists of 4 key capabilities: self-awareness, knowing what you're feeling; self-management, handling your emotions effectively; social awareness, perceiving others' emotions; and relationship management, handling interpersonal dynamics well. Stoicism directly develops the first 2 and indirectly strengthens the last 2. When you're not overwhelmed by your own emotions, you can actually perceive others' emotions more clearly. When you've mastered your own reactions, you can respond to others more skillfully. One crucial aspect of emotional mastery is learning to sit with discomfort. Much manipulation works by triggering uncomfortable emotions and then offering immediate relief, if you comply. You feel guilty, and they offer absolution if you do what they want. You feel anxious, and they offer certainty if you accept their solution. You feel inadequate, and they offer validation if you buy their product. But when you've learned to sit with discomfort, when you can tolerate guilt, anxiety, and inadequacy without desperately seeking escape, these manipulations lose their power. You can feel uncomfortable and simply stay with it, investigate it, wait it out. Choose your response rather than grasping at the first promise of relief. This doesn't mean pursuing discomfort for its own sake or remaining in genuinely harmful situations. It means developing the capacity to experience difficult emotions without being compelled to immediately escape them through action, substance, or compliance. It's the difference between "I feel anxious, therefore I must do something right now to make this stop," and "I feel anxious and I can sit with this feeling while I figure out the wise response." That capacity to tolerate discomfort is freedom itself. Emotional mastery also requires compassion, both for yourself and others. When you fail at emotional regulation, when you react instead of respond, when you're hijacked by anger or fear or shame, the Stoic response isn't self-flagellation. It's self-compassion combined with learning. I'm human. I'm learning. What can I understand from this? How can I respond better next time? This compassionate self-relationship reduces the shame that often leads people to hide their mistakes, which creates vulnerabilities that manipulators exploit. When you can acknowledge your emotional struggles without shame, you can address them directly rather than hiding them where they become leverage points. Similarly, understanding that others are often acting from their own unmastered emotions creates compassion that protects against manipulation. When someone tries to make you angry, you see beneath the surface. This person is suffering, acting from their own unexamined pain. This doesn't mean you accept mistreatment, but it means you respond from wisdom rather than from reactive emotion. Their emotional dysregulation doesn't trigger yours. You remain centered, masterful, free to choose your response rather than being pulled into their emotional storm. The practice of emotional mastery is ongoing. Each day brings new opportunities to work with emotions skillfully. Someone cuts you off in traffic. Can you observe the flash of anger without letting it become rage? A project fails. Can you feel disappointment without cascading into despair? Someone praises you. Can you appreciate it without becoming dependent on it? These daily practices, these small moments of choosing skillful relationship with emotion, accumulate into a profound capability. You become someone who feels deeply but isn't controlled by feelings, who experiences fully but isn't overwhelmed by experience. Living by the law of emotional mastery means committing to a conscious relationship with your inner life. It means observing your emotions with curiosity rather than judgment. It means pausing between feeling and action to choose wisdom. It means understanding that you feel emotions but are not your emotions. You are the awareness that experiences emotions. It means developing the capacity to sit with discomfort, to tolerate uncertainty, to experience difficult feelings without desperately seeking escape. It means treating yourself with compassion while still holding yourself accountable for your choices. When you achieve emotional mastery, you become extraordinarily difficult to manipulate. Manipulators rely on triggering overwhelming emotions that bypass your rational mind and compel immediate action. But your emotions don't overwhelm you anymore. They inform you. They're signals you interpret, not commands you obey. You feel the fear they try to trigger, but you're not controlled by it. You feel the desire they try to inflame, but you're not enslaved by it. You feel the shame they try to impose, but you don't accept it as truth. You remain emotionally alive, feeling, responding, engaging, but you remain the master of your emotional house. No one else holds the keys. You are sovereign in your inner kingdom. You are free. If you could trace every manipulation back to its source, you would find two fundamental forces: fear and desire. These are the twin engines that drive human behavior, the strings that manipulators pull to make us dance. Fear of loss, fear of pain, fear of death, fear of rejection, fear of failure. Desire for pleasure, desire for security, desire for validation, desire for power, desire for more. Between these two forces, most people spend their entire lives being pushed and pulled, controlled by whoever can most skillfully trigger one or the other. The Stoics understood that true freedom requires mastering both, not eliminating them, that's impossible and undesirable, but understanding them so completely that they become tools you use rather than forces that use you. Fear is perhaps the most powerful manipulation tool ever discovered. When someone can make you afraid, they can make you do almost anything. This is why tyranny always relies on fear, why advertising uses fear of inadequacy, why abusive relationships use fear of abandonment, why cults use fear of damnation. Fear bypasses rational thinking and triggers survival responses. Your prefrontal cortex goes offline, your amygdala takes over, and you're suddenly making decisions from your most primitive brain, the part that's easily manipulated because it's designed for immediate survival, not complex judgment. The Stoics approached fear through analysis and exposure. First, analyze. What exactly am I afraid of? Be specific. I'm afraid of losing my job is vague. Dig deeper. Are you afraid of financial insecurity, loss of identity, what others will think, the judgment of having failed? When you identify the specific fear, you can examine it rationally. How likely is this outcome? If it happens, what would I actually do? Have I survived difficulties before? What's the worst that would truly happen, stripped of catastrophizing? Seneca practiced this analysis constantly. He would take his fears and interrogate them. What if I lose all my wealth? Well, I've lived simply before and can again. What if I'm exiled? Many great people have been exiled and found meaning there. What if I die? Then I die, as all humans do, as I will inevitably do eventually. This analytical approach doesn't eliminate fear, but it right-sizes it. What seemed overwhelming becomes manageable. What seemed catastrophic becomes survivable. The fear loses its paralyzing grip, and you can think clearly about whether it warrants any action and, if so, what action serves you rather than the manipulator. But analysis alone isn't enough. The Stoics also practiced exposure, deliberately putting themselves in situations they feared to prove they could handle them. They practiced voluntary discomfort to become comfortable with discomfort. They slept on hard floors to lose fear of physical hardship. They ate simple food to lose fear of deprivation. They contemplated death daily to lose fear of mortality. This wasn't masochism. It was systematic desensitization, inoculation through controlled exposure. When you voluntarily experienced what you fear, involuntary experience of it loses its terror. Modern psychology has validated this approach through exposure therapy, which is now the gold standard treatment for anxiety disorders. The principle is identical to Stoic practice. By gradually and repeatedly exposing yourself to what you fear in a controlled way, you learn that you can tolerate it. Your nervous system recalibrates. What once triggered panic now triggers manageable discomfort. This is freedom, not the absence of fear, but the confidence that you can handle what you fear. Desire operates as fear's mirror twin. Where fear pushes you away from what you don't want, desire pulls you toward what you do want, and wherever you're pulled, you can be led. Marketers study desire with scientific precision. They know how to trigger wanting, how to make you believe that satisfaction is just one purchase away. Relationship manipulators know how to dangle exactly what you desire: attention, affection, validation, just out of reach, keeping you pursuing. Career manipulators know how to exploit your desire for advancement, recognition, or security. The Stoic approach to desire is neither suppression nor indulgence, but understanding. First, distinguish between natural and necessary desires, natural but unnecessary desires, and unnatural and unnecessary desires. Natural and necessary: food when hungry, water when thirsty, shelter from cold. These are legitimate. Natural but unnecessary: fine food, luxurious housing, aesthetic pleasure. These are fine to enjoy when available, but dangerous to need. Unnatural and unnecessary: extreme wealth, fame, power over others. These are never satisfying because they have no natural limit. You can never be rich enough, famous enough, powerful enough. They create permanent craving. When you understand these distinctions, you can examine your desires. What am I actually wanting? Is this a genuine need or manufactured desire? Will having this truly satisfy me, or just create new wanting? Who benefits from my wanting this? This analytical approach reveals how many of your desires aren't really yours at all. They're implanted through advertising, social conditioning, comparison, and manipulation. When you see this clearly, many desires simply dissolve. You stop wanting what you don't actually want, which is incredibly liberating. The Stoics also practiced what Epicurus called hedonic adaptation, the recognition that desire satisfaction is temporary. You desire something intensely. You get it. You experience pleasure. Then the pleasure fades, and desire moves to the next target. This is the hedonic treadmill, and you can spend your entire life running on it, never satisfied, always manipulatable through the promise of the next desire fulfillment. The Stoic solution is to appreciate rather than crave, to prefer rather than need, to enjoy what you have rather than constantly reaching for what you don't have. But here's the sophisticated insight. The goal isn't to eliminate desire. Desire is part of being human and can be a powerful force for good. The goal is to choose your desires consciously rather than having them chosen for you. To desire virtue, wisdom, justice, courage. These desires elevate and can't be manipulated because no one can give or take them from you. To desire to love well, to create meaningfully, to contribute to something larger than yourself. These desires enrich life and don't make you vulnerable to external control. But to desire endlessly what others can give or withhold, approval, status, possessions, is to give others endless power over you. The practice of mastering desire includes gratitude. When you regularly appreciate what you have, desire for what you don't have loses intensity, not because you're suppressing wanting, but because you're genuinely satisfied. The Stoics practiced daily gratitude, not as a positive thinking technique, but as a reality check. Look at what you have. Really see it. How remarkable is it that you have functioning eyes, working limbs, a thinking mind, that you have food, shelter, relationships? This isn't minimizing legitimate problems. It's recognizing legitimate abundance, and abundance consciousness is immune to scarcity manipulation. Another practice is the strategic satisfaction of desires. When you feel desire arising, sometimes the best response is to satisfy it, but consciously, on your terms, not compulsively. You desire food, eat mindfully, tasting fully, satisfied with enough rather than stuffed with too much. You desire rest, rest deeply rather than scrolling distractedly. You desire connection, engage genuinely rather than seeking validation. When you satisfy desires consciously, they're satisfied. When you indulge them compulsively, they intensify. The key is consciousness, being the director of your desire, not its slave. Mastering fear and desire also requires understanding their relationship. Often they're two sides of the same coin. You desire something because you fear not having it. You desire wealth because you fear poverty. You desire approval because you fear rejection. You desire control because you fear chaos. When you can see this connection, you can address the root rather than just the symptom. Address the fear of poverty through confidence in your ability to survive simply, and the desperate desire for wealth diminishes. Address the fear of rejection through self-acceptance, and the desperate desire for approval fades. The ultimate mastery comes when you can observe fear and desire arising without being compelled to act on them. You feel fear, you acknowledge it, you consider it, but you don't obey it unless wisdom suggests you should. You feel desire, you notice it, you examine it, but you don't chase it unless it serves your values. This is freedom. Feeling without being controlled by feelings, wanting without being enslaved by wanting, fearing without being paralyzed by fear. Living by this principle means daily practice. Each day you'll encounter situations that trigger fear or desire. Each one is an opportunity to practice mastery. Someone threatens you. Can you feel the fear without being controlled by it? Something attractive is offered. Can you feel the desire without being pulled by it? This constant practice builds a profound capability. You become someone who feels fully but chooses wisely, who experiences fear and desire as information rather than commands, who remains free even while feeling the full spectrum of human emotion. When you master fear and desire, manipulation becomes nearly impossible, because manipulation is ultimately about triggering fear or desire to control behavior. Make someone afraid enough or want something enough, and you can direct them. But when someone has mastered these forces, when they feel them but aren't controlled by them, your manipulation tactics fail. They feel the fear you try to trigger, but they don't panic. They feel the desire you try to inflame, but they don't grasp. They remain centered, free, capable of choosing wisdom over reaction. They are no longer puppets whose strings you can pull. They are sovereign beings who feel deeply and choose wisely. They are free. Everything changes. Everything ends. Nothing lasts. This is perhaps the most fundamental truth about existence, and most people spend their lives trying desperately not to acknowledge it. We pretend our relationships will last forever. We act as if our youth, health, and life itself are permanent. We build our identities around things that will inevitably change or disappear. And in this denial of impermanence, we create enormous suffering and vulnerability. Because when we're attached to permanence in an impermanent world, we're easily manipulated by anyone who threatens or promises to preserve what we're clinging to. The Stoics embraced impermanence completely, and in that embrace found a freedom most people never imagined possible. The Buddhist concept of anicca, impermanence, finds its parallel in Stoic thought through the recognition that all external things are in constant flux. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Time is a river of passing events, no, a raging torrent." He meditated constantly on how everything is temporary, how even the mightiest empires crumble, how the most powerful people become dust, how all human dramas are brief flickers in the vast expanse of eternity. This wasn't nihilistic despair, it was liberating perspective. When you truly understand that nothing lasts, you stop grasping so desperately, and in releasing your grip, you become free. Consider how attachment to permanence makes you vulnerable to manipulation. You believe your relationship is permanent, so threats to end it control you. You believe your job is permanent, so threats of termination manipulate you. You believe your youth is permanent, so the beauty industry exploits your inevitable aging. You believe your status is permanent, so you'll compromise to preserve it. Every manipulation that works through threat or promise relies on your denial of impermanence. When you accept that everything changes, these manipulations lose their power. You can't be threatened with losing what you already know is temporary. The Stoic practice begins with observation. Look around you. Notice change happening constantly. Your body is different than it was yesterday. Cells dying and being born, hair growing, skin renewing. Your thoughts are different than they were an hour ago. Your relationships are different than they were last year. People grow, change, sometimes grow apart. Your circumstances are different than they were last month. Even your identity, your personality, beliefs, preferences is in flux. Nothing is static. Everything is process. This isn't depressing. It's reality. And seeing reality clearly is always the first step to freedom. The Stoics practiced a specific meditation on impermanence, particularly regarding what they cherished most. Marcus Aurelius would kiss his children goodnight while reminding himself, "Tomorrow you may be dead. Tomorrow they may be dead." This seems morbid to modern sensibilities, but its effect was precisely the opposite. By acknowledging impermanence, he loved more deeply. He didn't take his children for granted. He was fully present with them because he knew their time together was limited. This is the paradox of impermanence. Fully accepting that something will end allows you to fully appreciate it while it's here. This practice transforms how you hold everything in your life. You hold your possessions lightly, knowing they're temporary. They can be lost, broken, stolen, or simply deteriorate. This doesn't mean you don't take care of them or appreciate them. It means you're not devastated when they're gone because you never pretended they were permanent. You hold your relationships tenderly, knowing they'll change or end. People leave, people die, people grow in different directions. This doesn't mean you don't love deeply. It means you love without the desperate clinging that suffocates relationships and makes you manipulatable through fear of abandonment. The recognition of impermanence also addresses a specific manipulation tactic: the artificial creation of permanence. Marketers sell products as if they'll make you permanently happy. Relationship manipulators promise they'll love you forever if you comply. Career manipulators suggest that this position, this status, will be permanently satisfying. Ideological manipulators claim their system will create permanent solutions. All of these are lies, and they're powerful lies because they exploit people's desperate desire for something permanent in an impermanent world. But when you've accepted impermanence, these promises ring hollow. You know nothing is permanent. You're not looking for permanence. You're looking for meaning in the moment, not forever. Solutions. Impermanence also provides profound perspective on problems. When you're in the middle of difficulty, it feels overwhelming and permanent. But the Stoic practitioner remembers, this too shall pass. This difficulty is temporary. This pain will change. This situation will evolve. The empire that felt invincible yesterday is ruins today. The person who wielded such power is forgotten. The problem that seemed insurmountable was overcome or became irrelevant. This perspective doesn't minimize real suffering, but it prevents the multiplication of suffering that comes from believing pain is permanent. Pain plus belief in its permanence equals despair. Pain plus recognition of its impermanence equals bearable difficulty. But here's a crucial nuance. Impermanence applies to good things and bad things equally. Your suffering is temporary, but so is your joy. Your problems will pass, but so will your successes. This might seem to reduce the value of good things, but it actually enhances it. When you know your happiness is temporary, you savor it fully rather than taking it for granted. When you know your success is temporary, you enjoy it without building your entire identity around it. When you know your health is temporary, you appreciate it with every breath rather than assuming it will always be there. The Stoics distinguished between what is ephemeral, lasting a very short time, and what is eternal, lasting forever. Most of what we value is ephemeral. Our bodies, our possessions, our relationships as they currently exist, our circumstances, our feelings, our thoughts. But there are things that are eternal in a different sense. Virtue is eternal because it's always valuable regardless of time. Truth is eternal because it doesn't depend on circumstances. The principles of wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance don't become obsolete. When you invest primarily in the ephemeral, you're constantly anxious about loss. When you invest primarily in the eternal, you have unshakable ground. This doesn't mean neglecting the ephemeral. The Stoics engaged fully with temporary things. They loved people, pursued projects, enjoyed pleasures, but they didn't confuse the temporary with the permanent. They didn't build their entire peace of mind on foundations that would inevitably crumble. They invested in what was eternal, their character, their principles, their virtue, while engaging with and appreciating the temporary. This is the art of living well with impermanence, full engagement without desperate attachment. The practice of embracing impermanence also includes embracing your own mortality. The Stoics meditated on death constantly, not morbidly, but realistically. You could leave life right now, Marcus Aurelius reminded himself. Let this determine what you do and say and think. This radical acceptance of mortality is perhaps the ultimate freedom. When you've truly accepted that you will die, that it could be today, that nothing can prevent it, you become ungovernable through fear of death. And since the fear of death underlies most other fears, you become fundamentally free. This meditation on mortality also creates urgency to live well. When you fully grasp that your time is limited, you stop postponing what matters. You don't wait until you have more money, more time, more security. You live now according to your values because now is all you're guaranteed. This urgency is energizing, not depressing. It focuses you on what truly matters and eliminates the trivial. You don't have time for resentment, pettiness, or living according to others' expectations. You have a brief time to live well, and you're not going to waste it being manipulated into a life you don't value. The embrace of impermanence also transforms your relationship with change. Most people resist change because they're attached to how things are or how they were. But change is inevitable. Resisting it is like trying to prevent the river from flowing. When you embrace impermanence, you embrace change as the natural state of things. You become flexible, adaptable, resilient. When circumstances shift, you shift with them. When relationships evolve, you evolve with them. When plans fail, you make new plans. You're not rigid and brittle, easily broken by unexpected change. You're fluid and strong, flowing around obstacles. Living by the law of impermanence means incorporating this awareness into daily life. Each morning, acknowledge, everything I have today could be gone tomorrow. My life could end today. This relationship could change. This circumstance could shift. And then, from that acknowledgement, ask, how do I want to engage with this day? How do I want to treat the people in my life, knowing our time together is limited? How do I want to spend my finite time and energy? What really matters when everything is temporary? This practice doesn't make life feel futile. It makes life feel precious. When you know something is temporary, you value it differently. The flower is beautiful precisely because it will wilt. The sunset is magnificent precisely because it will fade. The conversation is meaningful precisely because it will end. The embrace is tender precisely because one day there will be no more embraces. Impermanence doesn't diminish value, it concentrates it. Every moment becomes precious when you know there are only so many moments. When you live by the law of impermanence, you become unmanipulatable through attachment. You can't be controlled through threats to take what you're desperately clinging to, because you're not desperately clinging. You're holding everything with an open hand, present, engaged, appreciating, but not grasping. You can't be controlled through promises of permanent security, because you know security is temporary. You can't be controlled through fear of change, because you've accepted change as life's fundamental nature. You remain free to engage fully with the temporary beauty of existence, to love deeply without desperate attachment, to strive meaningfully without demanding permanent results. You dance with impermanence rather than fighting it, and in that dance you find a freedom that those who cling to permanence never know. You are fully alive to each moment because you know each moment is all there is. You are free. There's a profound paradox at the heart of Stoic philosophy. The way to preserve yourself is to give yourself away. The way to find meaning is to serve something larger than yourself. The way to become unmanipulatable is to make your life about something other than your own comfort and advantage. This seems counterintuitive. Shouldn't self-preservation require focusing on yourself? Shouldn't freedom from manipulation require protecting your interests above all else? The Stoics discovered something remarkable. When your life is organized around service, contributing to your family, your community, humanity, the natural order, you become simultaneously more connected and more autonomous. You're harder to manipulate because you're not primarily motivated by self-interest, which is what most manipulation targets. Marcus Aurelius was the most powerful man in the Roman Empire, yet he saw his role as one of service. He wrote, "At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, 'I have to go to work as a human being.' What do I have to complain about if I'm going to do what I was born for, the things I was brought into the world to do?" He understood his life as obligation, duty, service. This wasn't oppression, it was purpose. When you're called to something greater than yourself, petty manipulations become irrelevant. You're not primarily seeking comfort, approval, or advantage. You're seeking to fulfill your role, to contribute meaningfully, to serve well. Service begins with understanding your place in the larger whole. The Stoics saw humans as social beings, naturally interconnected, parts of a greater organism. You're not a separate individual who occasionally interacts with others. You're a node in a vast network, shaped by others and shaping them in turn. Your well-being and others' well-being are inextricably linked. This isn't selfless martyrdom, it's enlightened self-interest. You flourish when your community flourishes. You suffer when your community suffers. Service to others is service to the system of which you're a part. It's serving the whole that includes you. This understanding transforms how you approach relationships and work. You're not asking, "What can I get from this?" as your primary question. You're asking, "What can I contribute? How can I serve? What does this situation need?" This shift in orientation is profoundly anti-manipulation. Most manipulation works by exploiting what you want, your desires, your fears, your self-interest. But when your primary motivation is service, when you're genuinely asking how you can contribute rather than what you can extract, manipulation tactics misfire. The manipulator is offering you something in exchange for compliance, but you're not primarily focused on what you can get. However, and this is crucial, Stoic service is not self-destruction. It's not subordinating yourself to anyone who demands it. It's not saying yes to everything. It's not martyrdom or people-pleasing. The Stoics were very clear about this. Your first duty is to preserve your own virtue, your own rational nature, your own capacity to serve. You can't serve others well if you've destroyed yourself. You can't contribute to the whole if you've depleted yourself completely. Self-preservation and service aren't opposed. They're integrated. You preserve yourself so that you can serve effectively. This means setting boundaries, saying no when requests violate your principles or exceed your capacity, protecting your time, energy, and resources so that you can deploy them where they truly matter. The Stoic serves from a position of strength, not weakness, from choice, not compulsion, from clear-eyed assessment of where they can contribute most meaningfully, not from desperate need for approval or paralyzing guilt. This discernment is essential. Otherwise, service becomes just another form of manipulation. You're controlled through appeals to duty, through guilt about not doing enough, through exploitation of your desire to help. Epictetus taught that we have different roles: parent, child, citizen, friend, colleague, and each role carries specific obligations. Service means fulfilling these role-based duties excellently. As a parent, serving your children by raising them well. As a citizen, serving your community by contributing to its flourishing. As a friend, serving your friends through loyalty and honest counsel. As a colleague, serving your shared purpose through competent work. This isn't abstract or overwhelming. It's concrete and manageable. You don't have to save the world. You have to fulfill your specific roles with excellence. This role-based approach to service also protects against manipulation. When you're clear about your roles and their associated duties, you can evaluate requests against them. Someone asks you to do something that would require neglecting your actual duties. You can decline without guilt. You're not being selfish. You're being clear about your priorities. You're not refusing to serve. You're refusing to be distracted from the service you're actually responsible for. This clarity is tremendously freeing. You're not vulnerable to every request, every demand, every attempt to redirect your energy. Service also provides intrinsic motivation that's immune to external manipulation. When you're working primarily for external rewards, money, approval, status, you can be controlled through threats to withhold those rewards or promises to increase them. But when you're working primarily because the work itself matters, because you're contributing to something meaningful, because you're fulfilling your role well, external rewards become secondary. You do the work because it needs doing, because it serves the larger purpose, because it's your role to do it. No one can manipulate you by threatening to take away rewards you weren't primarily working for. The Stoics also taught that service includes bearing with others' faults and limitations. Humans are imperfect. They make mistakes. They're sometimes difficult, irrational, or unkind. Service means expecting this and responding with patience and compassion rather than frustration and withdrawal. But, and this is key, bearing with others' faults doesn't mean accepting abuse. It doesn't mean tolerating mistreatment. It means recognizing that people are flawed while still maintaining your boundaries. You can be patient with someone's struggles while still refusing to be manipulated by them. One profound aspect of service is that it connects you to meaning larger than your individual concerns. When you're contributing to something that will outlast you, when you're part of a project larger than yourself, when you're serving purposes that transcend your immediate interests, you gain perspective that makes petty manipulation seem irrelevant. Someone tries to manipulate you through threats to your comfort. You're not primarily focused on comfort. Someone tries to manipulate you through appeals to your status. You're not primarily focused on status. You're focused on serving well, contributing meaningfully, fulfilling your role excellently. This focus is armor. Service also creates genuine connection that contrasts sharply with manipulative relationships. Manipulative relationships are transactional. I'll give you this if you give me that. Service-oriented relationships are contributional. I'll contribute to your well-being because your well-being matters, and you'll contribute to mine for the same reason. These relationships are stronger because they're not contingent on getting something in return. They're based on mutual care and shared purpose. And relationships based on shared purpose and mutual service are naturally resistant to manipulation because they're not fundamentally about using each other, they're about serving together. The practice of service requires daily attention to the question, how can I contribute today? Not, what can I get? But what can I give? Not, how can I advance my interests? But how can I serve my roles excellently? This shift in daily focus gradually transforms your entire orientation. You become someone who's looking for ways to contribute rather than ways to extract. And people who are genuinely oriented toward contribution are difficult to manipulate, because manipulation assumes self-interest as the primary motivation. But let's address a potential concern. Doesn't this make you vulnerable to exploitation? Won't people take advantage of your service orientation? The answer is yes. Some will try. This is where Stoic wisdom becomes essential. You serve discerningly, not indiscriminately. You preserve your capacity to serve by not allowing yourself to be depleted. You maintain boundaries that protect your well-being. You serve where you can genuinely contribute, not where you're merely being used. The difference between service and exploitation is that service is chosen freely based on your values and roles, while exploitation is compelled through manipulation. When you're clear about this distinction, you can serve generously while protecting yourself wisely. Living by the law of service means organizing your life around contribution rather than acquisition, around giving rather than getting, around fulfilling your roles rather than maximizing your advantages. It means waking up each day asking how you can serve well rather than how you can get ahead. It means measuring your days by whether you contributed meaningfully, not by whether you extracted maximum benefit. This orientation creates a kind of invulnerability to manipulation because you're simply playing a different game than the manipulator assumes. When you live this way, you discover something remarkable. The more you genuinely serve, the more you flourish. Not because service is rewarded, though it often is, but because humans are fundamentally social beings who find meaning in contribution. We're built for service. We're at our best when we're giving our best to something that matters. This isn't sacrifice, it's fulfillment. And fulfilled people are unmanipulatable because they already have what manipulation promises. They have meaning, they have purpose, they have the deep satisfaction of living according to their nature as humans called to serve the larger whole of which they're an essential part. They are free.